there's something deeply uncomfortable about waiting. Just waiting for a few seconds. Not just inconvenient, not just frustrating, uncomfortable at a soul level. Because waiting exposes us. We don't like it. We don't like waiting in traffic, inching forward while the clock keeps ticking. We don't like standing and waiting in lines, checking our watch, shifting our weight, wondering why the person in front of us just suddenly decided they have 20 questions they need answered. We don't like waiting for test results, for phone calls, for answers that seem just out of reach. And the longer the wait, the louder those questions become. We have microwaves, fast food, same-day delivery, instant downloads, everything designed to eliminate delay in our lives. And yet, somehow, we are still the most impatient people in history, maybe now more than ever, because we've been conditioned to expect immediacy. Quick fixes, fast results, instant relief you look for. You go to get your bottle of ibuprofen or Tylenol. You want the one that says quick acting, instant relief. And then we come to God. And He doesn't move at our speed. He doesn't operate on our timeline. He doesn't rush to meet our deadlines. He doesn't panic when we panic. He waits. And then, and this is the part that stretches us, He calls us to wait with Him. And that is where faith gets tested in a different way. Not in pressure, not in action, but in patience. Because it is one thing to trust God when everything is moving. It is another thing to trust Him when everything feels still. When prayers seem delayed, when answers feel distant, when progress looks invisible, that is where faith feels slow, and that is where faith gets real. And that's where we land today as we conclude this series, Faith IRL, Faith in Real Life. Now, let me bring us back for a moment, because we took a brief pause just last week for Easter, simply Easter, celebrating the resurrection, the victory, the hope we have in Jesus. But before that, we began this series in the book of James, asking a simple but searching question. What does real faith actually look like in everyday life? Week 1, we said faith under pressure. Real faith endures. Trials don't destroy it, they develop it. Week 2, we said faith in action. Real faith acts. It moves, it serves, it speaks with integrity. And now James brings us to a place that might be even harder than both of these. Because it's one thing to endure, it's another thing to act, but it is something else entirely to have to wait. So let's read James 5 verses 7 and 8 together. Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. You too be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. Be patient. Stand firm. Wait. And if we're honest, that's where the struggle really begins, right? That before James ever tells us to be patient, though, he takes us somewhere deeper. He doesn't start with the surface. He doesn't start with circumstances. He starts with the heart. Reading now from James 4, verses 1 and 2. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from the desires that battle within you? See, James is peeling back the layers now. Because the real problem is not what is happening around you, it's what is happening inside of you. Desires, not bad desires necessarily, but powerful ones. Desires for comfort, desires for control, desires for clarity, desires for things to just go our way. And those desires don't just sit quietly. They battle, they compete, they collide, they create tension. And when those desires go unmet, when life doesn't cooperate with our expectation, something begins to rise up within us. Frustration, impatience, irritation, sometimes even anger, because we had a plan. We had a timeline. We had a picture in our minds of how it was supposed to go, and now it's not going that way. So James says that's where the conflict comes from. Not just external conflict, though we see plenty of that, arguments, sharp words, strained relationships. But internal conflict, a war within us, a restless, unresolved, unsettled heart that keeps saying, this isn't how it's supposed to be. Let me say it plainly. Impatience is often a symptom of misplaced control. We want to manage outcomes. We want to manipulate timelines. We want to master situations that were never really ours to control. And then when we can't, we feel it very deeply. Because control feels safe. It feels predictable, manageable, certain. Even when it's not real, even when it's just an illusion, we hold on to feel steady. But faith that waits does something differently. It loosens its grip. It releases control. It surrenders the timeline, and that is not easy. Because it means trusting God in the tension, in the unknown, and in the in-between. But that is where real faith begins to grow. And that brings us to the turning point this morning. Because once James exposes the battle going on within us, he doesn't leave us there. He points us to a posture that changes everything. Reading again from James 4, verses 6 and 7. God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Submit yourselves then to God. There it is. Submit. Not resist, not control, not demand. Submit. And if we're honest, that word doesn't sit easily with us, does it? It rubs against our instincts because everything in us wants to rise up, take charge, fix the problem, push the process forward. Pride whispers, take control. Culture echoes, you deserve better than this. And our hearts agree more often than we'd like to admit. But James draws a clear line here. Pride puts us in opposition to God. Humility positions us under his grace. Pride says, hey, I know better. Humility says, God knows the best. Pride says, I'll handle it. Humility says, God, I need you so much right now. And notice this. Pride resists the process. Humility rests in the process. Submission is not weakness. It is trust. It is the quiet steady confidence that God sees what we cannot, knows what we do not, and is working even when we feel stuck. Because when you submit to God, you stop striving for control. You stop scrambling for answers. You stop forcing outcomes, and instead you surrender. Not passively, but faithfully. And in that surrender, waiting is no longer wasted. Waiting becomes worship. Waiting becomes trust stretched over time. And that is the beginning of faith that waits. Now, James gives us an illustration, and it's not flashy, it's not dramatic, it's simple, a farmer. James 5:7 simply begins, "See how the farmer waits." Think about that. A farmer does not control the rain. A farmer does not control the seasons. A farmer does not control the growth. He plants, he prepares, he works, and then he waits. And if he wakes up the next morning and says, "Well, why isn't there a harvest yet?" we would say, because that's not how it works, right? Growth takes time. And yet, we treat our spiritual lives differently. We want instant maturity, instant answers, instant breakthroughs. And God says, be patient. Because some things only grow in the soil of time. Faith, character, love, endurance. They don't develop overnight, they develop over seasons. And the farmer understands something we often forget. Waiting is not wasted, waiting is working. Something is happening beneath the surface, even when you can't see it. Let me tell you a story. There was a man named Thomas who planted a small garden in his backyard. Nothing extravagant, just a few rows of vegetables. He watered it daily, checked the soil, pulled the weeds, and after 1 week, nothing. No sprouts, no signs of life, just dirt. And one afternoon, frustrated, he grabbed a shovel and attacked the dirt. And the neighbor asked, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm digging them up to see if they're growing." Now, we may chuckle at that because we know that's not how it works, right? But spiritually, we do the same thing. I mean, we rush the process. We question the growth. We dig up what God is trying to develop in us. And James says, don't do that. Be patient because God is working even when you don't see it. And this is where it presses in even closer, because waiting is not just about circumstances, it's about people. In James 5:9, he writes, "Don't grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged." Now that feels uncomfortably specific, because it's one thing to wait on God, it's another thing entirely to have to wait on people, right? Waiting on someone to change, waiting on someone to grow, waiting on someone to apologize, or even just acknowledge the hurt. And in that waiting, something begins to simmer inside, not always loud, sometimes quietly, a slow build of frustration. A steady drip of disappointment, a low-grade irritation that settles deeply into the soul. And if we're not careful, that frustration leaks out in our tone, in our words, in our attitude. We grumble, not always out loud, but in our hearts. And James says, guys, church, that matters. Because grumbling is not just a reaction, it's a revelation. It reveals a heart that is struggling to trust God and struggling to love others. And that's where the test comes. Because faith that waits loves, and loves deeply. Even when it's inconvenient, even when it's undeserved, even when it's exhausting, because love is not just emotional, it is intentional, it is patient. In 1 Corinthians 13, Paul writes this, you've heard this, love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love is those things, not just when it's easy, but when it's slow, when it's stretching, and when it's sanctifying. And that kind of love, that patient, persistent, persevering love, that is where faith becomes visible in our lives. Not in how we react when things go our way, but in how we respond when they don't. And just in case we think that kind of patience is unrealistic, unattainable, reserved for the select few, James gives us a few examples. Real people, real pain, real perseverance. Listen and read along. Brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. Amen. The prophets. Men like Jeremiah who wept over a people who would not listen. Isaiah, who spoke truth to a nation that turned away. Elijah, who stood alone on a mountain, outnumbered and overwhelmed. They spoke for God faithfully, boldly, consistently. And what did they receive in return? Resistance, rejection, ridicule. And yet they remained. They stayed steady. They stood firm. Not because the results were immediate, but because their trust was anchored in God. And then there's Job. Job didn't just face inconvenience, he faced devastation, loss of wealth, loss of family, loss of health. And in the middle of it all, confusion, questions, and silence, accusations even, no quick answers, no easy explanations, and yet Job says this, the Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. That's not shallow faith. That's not surface level spirituality in my book. That is deep, durable, disciplined faith. Faith that holds on when everything else is falling apart. And James reminds us that faith is not about perfection, it's about persistence. Not about having it all figured out, but about refusing to let go of God in the middle of the unknown. And that is faith that waits. And this is where it all comes together. Because beneath the waiting, beneath the struggle, beneath the frustration, there is a tension, a real tension, not between good and bad, but between our timing and God's timing, because they rarely match up. We want God to move quickly. God often chooses to move deeply. We want answers now. God is shaping something eternal. We want relief. God is producing refinement. We want the outcome. God is after the transformation. And those are not always the same thing. Because if God gave us everything we wanted, when we wanted it, how we wanted it, we might get results, but we would miss the growth. We might get relief, but we would miss maturity. We might get exactly what we asked for, but not who we are meant to become. And that's where faith has to decide. Will I trust God's timing even when it feels delayed? Will I trust his process even when it feels slow? Will I trust his plan even when I cannot see the outcome? Because waiting is not empty. It is not wasted. It is not meaningless. It is trust stretched over time. And in that tension between what is and what will be, God is doing his deepest work in us. So let's bring this series together. Week 1, faith under pressure endures. Week 2, faith in motion acts. Week 3, faith that waits, trusts, endures, acts, waits. All 3 are necessary for us. Because real faith is not just seen in the storm or in the service, but in the slow, in the quiet, in the waiting. So here's the invitation. Where are you waiting right now? What feels slow? What feels uncertain? What feels unresolved in your life? And the question is not for you, how do I fix it? The question is, will I trust God in it? Will I be patient? Will I stand firm? Will I love anyway? Because that is faith IRL. Real faith lived out in real time. And when that kind of faith takes root, it doesn't just change you, it shapes you, it multiplies, it makes disciples. So don't rush the process. Don't fight the timing. Don't give up in the waiting, because God is working even now, even here, even when you can't see it. Amen? Here are your 3 questions. Do you feel the weight of these questions as we wrap up this series? We endure so that we may help others to endure. We show love, and in that love, we find our hearts swell for those around us. And in that, may we find humility and patience and growth. Be blessed and be a blessing to others.